kindergarten starts in 2 weeks. Soon, our little girl will be facing a world that we're constantly reminded is a dangerous place.
Vanished into thin air.
Full of child predators.
Whoever did it is still out there.
Murderers.
10 minutes later, she returned and he was gone.
To say I'm not just a little bit scared would be an understatement.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
I remember hopping on our bikes on a Saturday and probably biking 5 miles down to a little watering hole where we'd go fishing. And we were there all day. No cell phones, no pagers, not even pay phones nearby.
There must have been 30 or 40 different kids about my age in the neighborhood, and they would just wander into the house on the weekends.
We'd go for a walk, we'd play tackle football without any pads. We'd often go for walks up the railway tracks.
I can remember taking the bus by myself and going to a movie at the age of 9.
I was entrusted with a .22 rifle at the age of maybe 15.
Well, my brother had a 75cc motorcycle, and when we were growing up, I would often just take it for the entire afternoon.
Nobody would know where you were, and we'd play till it was pitch dark out.
It really wasn't that long ago. But today, the streets don't look quite the same. Something's missing. This is a neighborhood here where, you know, it was probably built 40 years ago, and it's turned over, and it's all young families again. Where are the kids? If you're like me, and a lot of people I've talked to lately, you might be wondering how the world could change so much in so little time. That's the kind of question that gets me going, and looking for answers is what I do for a living.
The search for her began that night.
And I just want someone to bring her home to me.
Before I made documentaries, I was a news reporter, and I learned how to dig for a story beneath what's on the surface.
Weeks later, her body was found floating in Alouette Lake in Golden Ears Provincial Park.
Now I'm arresting you for...
This was a big story a few years ago. It happened just outside of Vancouver. But Heather Thomas, the little girl who was murdered by her 23-year-old neighbor, is not the reason I'm asking these questions. There's a bigger reason.
We washed your hair. Feels soft when it's been brushed.
Her name
Okay.
is Emmanuelle. She's my own little girl.
You look like a big kid.
Today is her first day of kindergarten. She's not too nervous,
We'll try it today.
but I am.
Hey, can I take your picture?
This is the beginning of the next phase of her childhood.
Can I do one more?
I think it's about time for her parents to get a handle on the world she's about to grow up in.
Is it good?
Recently, she broke her arm.
Stand up. Let's go.
Fell off the monkey bars at the playground.
Ponytails. Perfect.
Like any parent,
Beautiful.
I blame myself.
You actually look like a big grown-up girl.
Okay.
Soon, she'll be demanding more and more freedom.
Any cars?
She'll want to play outside alone,
Let's go.
ride her bike to school. Part of me wants her to have the same experiences I had when I was a child. The other part of me is terrified that in this dangerous world,
You're not afraid?
I'm never afraid.
a little girl on a bicycle
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
is just asking for
Ready?
trouble.
Big smile, monkey. Okay, little one. Good. Thank you, honey. Have fun. See you, Manny.
Now, I want my little girl to be as safe as possible, but I want her to have a childhood too. This is the neighborhood in Surrey, BC, where little Heather Thomas was murdered. Chris Danielson lived in this community at the time. She still does.
It touched me because that day my daughter was asking to go to the park. and I couldn't take her because my husband and I were both working, so I had to say no. And we had an argument because she was that age, and it was about, I'm okay, Mom, I can look after myself. This is where Heather Thomas was staying. This is where her dad lived. It's also where the predator lived. He was one of the neighbors. Kids are all outside playing. Lots of parents keeping an eye back and forth. She got separated from the group, and I don't know how, but she did end up in the predator's apartment. I was absolutely furious. So I started a petition, said, get pedophiles out of our neighborhood. But people started driving from all over the place to sign it. And within a short period of time, we had over 50,000 signatures.
That petition led to Canada's first ever sex offender registry in 2004, and it was the beginning of Chris Danielson's campaign to make the streets safer. Today, she runs an organization called Put Kids First, and she continues to fight for tougher laws to protect children from the dangers of pedophiles.
It's everywhere, and if somebody was to watch the news regularly or get the paper, they would see that this happens over and over and over again. Teachers, soccer players, coaches, Boy Scout leaders, pastors, police, they're all people that you trust. They're people that you deal with in the community. They're people that look like you and me. They're people that you'll have over. They're people that you trust, and they are predators. Is it safe to go out on your own now like we did when we were kids? Absolutely not. If your kid's going out in the street and riding his bike by himself, he's going to be more of a target than my kid who has to go in a group and with the dogs, and with a phone and a walkie-talkie and everything else, and phoning me every 6 steps.
What's changed? Where were all those predators when I was growing up? Or were our parents just oblivious, maybe crazy? Was it really that different a generation ago? Or are we just more afraid today? I had to get to the bottom of this, and I was willing to go wherever I had to get the answers.
I always seem to be in trouble. I just can't remember doing what.
I wasn't making the best choices, but I was doing it anyway. But I had confidence that if something did happen, I would know how to get out of it.
There were consequences to trouble. Police were the least of your consequences. When your parents, when you got home and you got into some kind of trouble, those were the consequences.
That was very important, to be able to have that kind of opportunity to mess up, in a sense, to do things that were wrong, because you learn an enormous amount from messing up.
Meet Easy. Today he's 12 years old and he rides the New York subway to and from school alone every day. But that's nothing. He did it for the first time when he was just 9, and it made his mother famous.
My son had been asking me and my husband for months, could he please take the subway alone finally? You know, we're on the subway together all the time, and he just wanted to feel a little more grown up. My husband and I talked about it, and we decided, you know, it seems pretty safe, and he knows how to read a map, and he speaks the language, and, you know, it's time.
Stop is 59th Street.
The ride went without a hitch, and Lenore wrote about it in her column in the New York Sun. Within 48 hours, all hell broke loose.
A woman in New York has been dubbed the world's worst mother for letting her 9-year-old ride the subway system all on his own.
Across America and around the world, news spread of Izzy's subway ride.
2 days after the column ran, I was on The Today Show, MSNBC, Fox News, and National Public Radio, defending myself as not a crazy mom.
Why'd you do it? What if something, God forbid it happened?
And people were saying not only that they wished they could teach me a lesson, but a couple people said they wish something bad happened to him, and that would teach me a lesson. And I started thinking, I'm human. I don't want to tempt fate. I don't want, people to say, aha, she deserved it. It's that blame thing is very terrifying. But then I started getting mad, because who are they to say that I care less about my kids than they do, or that I know less than they do? And then I did my research, and it turned out that they are wrong and that I am right. We do live in particularly safe times.
Lenore started a website called Free Range Kids and published a book by the same name. Byline: Giving Our Children the Freedom We Had Without Going Nuts with Worry. The Free Range Kids movement had begun. I started to wonder, maybe it is possible for Emmanuelle to have a childhood more like mine.
I think we can go back if we go outside. I mean, it sounds like a very simplistic idea.
Does it take courage to do that?
If you're talking to your neighbors, if they know your kids, if they see them walking by, and instead of saying, "Where's your father?" they say, "Hi, Emmanuelle," you've already succeeded. You have eyes on the block watching her. You have her knowing her neighbors. You have you knowing who they are. And it's all it takes is the courage to walk out the door.
Lenore is still under constant attack from parents and others who think she's gambling with the lives of children.
Crossing against the light.
What a daredevil I am. And the statistics bear me out. And I know nobody goes by statistics when they think of their own children, because it's very emotional. But my emotions were that my kids were ready to grow up a little, and that you have to let go. And then it turned out that statistically, that makes sense. It turned out that psychologically, that makes sense. It turns out that historically, that's what we've always done. And it turns out that in the rest of the world, children walk to school at age 7. And it's just a historical anomaly right now that here in America and Canada, we're too afraid to do that.
This is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. How may I help you?
We made the short hop from New York to Washington, D.C. to visit the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They get 350 calls a day about missing kids. The organization was started back in the 80s by John and Reve Walsh after their son Adam was kidnapped and brutally murdered in Florida.
Adam Walsh disappeared from a store in Hollywood, Florida. He was there with his mother.
Reve said, "Adam, I'll be in the lamp department 2 hours over." And he said, "Mommy, I know where that is." And 10 minutes later, she returned and he was gone.
Today, John is famous. He hosts the TV show America's Most Wanted.
5 seconds. 4, 3.
3 kids from 3 different parts of the country who have one horrible thing in common. They're all missing.
He's told me many, many times when people talk about his fame, his celebrity, about the impact he's had, he says, "I'd trade it all to have my little boy back."
It's something that you never get over. You try to deal with it. You try to deal with it and maybe make something positive out of a horrible, horrible negative. But I still haven't figured out a way to explain to anybody what it's like to outlive your child.
Next of kin is being notified at this point in time.
It's not something that you ever get over, that you ever really learn how to deal with, or that you can explain to anyone. You can only say one thing. That day of naivete, that living in that bubble is over.
5 seconds. 4.
I wondered, if John Walsh were me with a young family today, what kinds of choices would he make?
It's a whole different climate. It's a whole different world right now. I wish we could go back to the Father Knows Best days. I really wish we could. I really, in my heart of hearts, but I also know the harsh reality that we can't go back there. Why roll the dice? Why take the chance?
Rolling the dice? Wow. I never thought about gambling with Emmanuelle's life. I need to know what the real odds are. It's time to dig into the crime stats.
Oh, crime today compared to 30 years ago is much lower. Serious violent crime has gone down significantly since the early 1990s.
Is my little girl safer today than somebody 5 years old in 1975?
I would say yes, in the sense that she's much less likely to be a murder victim. She's less likely now than she was then to be the victim of another sort of abduction or kidnapping. So yes, she is safer now.
But how much safer?
What is the probability of Emmanuel being abducted by a stranger?
There could be little green men from Mars that come down tomorrow and shoot us all with a ray gun, but it's not very likely. So with probability theory, we try to quantify things and say how likely are they to occur, which things are more likely, which things are less likely, which things are extremely unlikely. In a recent year, there were 35 cases reported of a child being abducted by a stranger, but that's out of over 6 million children under the age of 16 in Canada at the time. And if you work that out, that means the probability of your child being abducted is about 0.000005606, or another way to think of it is it works out to about 1 chance in 178,390.
And this is over 1 year.
This is for 1 year, yeah.
But still, and I don't call me crazy,
I won't.
right? So my kid's got to make it through 16 years.
That's true, yeah.
So from age probably 2 when they're mobile to 16, that's 14 years. So that number is more like, you got to divide that by 14 years, right? That would knock that number down to somewhere in the range of like 14,000.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's very good.
That's actually, but to me, that seems actually quite high.
Well, compare it to the chance of your daughter being killed in an automobile accident. It's about 18 times less likely this, being abducted by a stranger.
It's a dose of reality. Riding in a car, something we do almost every day, sounds pretty dangerous compared to a stranger abduction. Driving Emmanuel to school instead of letting her go on her own almost sounds irresponsible when you consider the real statistics.
I'm an accountant. I know about statistics, and they can be manipulated any way you want.
Not long ago, Randy White was a tough-on-crime member of Parliament. I always liked him because he spoke his mind.
In this day and age, arguing about statistical data on crime, we're off on the wrong track. The fact is that crime is prevalent.
I would be very suspicious of someone's motives if they said, don't pay attention to the statistics. I would wonder why that person wants us to trust him more than information gathered by multiple police agencies all across Canada and in reports to the federal government. I don't think there's any contest there.
I don't think that the world is a completely safe place. I don't think that has ever been the history of anything, in the animal kingdom. However, I think in terms of the history of humankind, we are at the safest point.
I think today's society is a lot more complex and somewhat more dangerous. And parents probably don't have as much time, many parents don't have as much time to teach their children and watch over their children as mine did.
I have to think consciously and carefully about how I raise my kids in order to avoid overparenting.
My perception is that the world is not more dangerous, and there's a lot of evidence to back me up on that. But my neighbor's perception is that the world is a more dangerous place.
Be a little bit careful, remember, it's a little bit slippery.
Why roll the dice?
Good job, honey.
John Walsh's words echo in my head. Why take a chance? Surprisingly, there are some researchers that warn that there's a bigger risk to overprotecting our kids. It's a phenomenon dubbed bubble wrapping.
If none of our children ever navigate their communities by themselves, never ride their bicycle, never walk to school, never go down to the store for us, if we bubble wrap them so much that they never have any of those opportunities to be away from us, then aren't there consequences as well in terms of our children growing up to understand how to keep themselves safe?
In his private practice, Dr. Michael Unger works with university-aged kids and their families. He studied an entire generation of children. He says today, many are suffering the long-term effects of an overprotected childhood.
There's a real increase in anxiety disorders and homesickness and kids who are plagiarizing and kids who are using their parents as sort of crutches to sort of get through their courses. Now you keep going with that. What kind of employees are these kids going to make?
Michael Unger and I are about the same age. We reminisced about the pickup ball games we used to have growing up in our own neighborhoods.
What used to happen out there in the fields when we were by ourselves was we learned about negotiating rules. We learned about, that bigger kids could be bullies. We learned about how you had to think about bringing water out to the field if it was a really hot day. You learned about getting there. You learned safety. You learned all kinds of stuff. If you have a scheduled activity like on a sports field and you're driving your kid there and you've anticipated everything for them, then they've kind of lost, it's not just the activity, they've lost all the things that they learned getting themselves into that activity.
Hey kids, I bet you're glad it's Friday. You looking forward to the weekend?
Yeah, Kevin and I are going to go hiking up to the lake. Yeah, my big brother's letting me take his boat out.
Fun is where you find it, providing you find it safely.
Think about it. You're sending your child to the store to get a quart of milk. There's a whole lot of things. There's about money, there's about talking to a store clerk, there's about understanding how you get yourself from place A to place B safely. There's all the things that go along with that. That's what I think we ultimately need to give our kids. Now roll the clock ahead 10 years, and now you have a kid who's potentially in a dangerous situation sexually, or perhaps someone's asking them to do something that's mildly criminal. The better we prepare the 6 and the 7-year-olds, or for that matter, the 4 and the 5-year-olds, to really understand what danger is and how to get through those situations, that perhaps, just perhaps, they'll be better prepared for making really good decisions when they are actually having to make them in their later teen years.
The problem with overcautious kids is they become risk averse.
And that could be really bad. According to some, it could completely reshape our society.
A willingness to take risks is absolutely essential for the future of the economy and the future of the democracy, because you need people who are innovators, who are problem solvers, who can tolerate failure, and out of that create success.
Wow, this is getting complicated. I never thought there could be a risk in keeping Emmanuel safe and sound indoors. One thing is certain. Whatever decision our family makes, it will set the tone for the rest of Emmanuel's life.
We fear terrorism, we fear tornadoes, we fear child abduction, we fear strange new pandemics. But what's interesting is the mismatch between that list of fears and the list of things that actually kill us. Heart disease. Most people aren't terribly afraid of heart disease, but that's right near the top of killers. Diabetes kills more people in 1 year than all the tornadoes and terrorism will kill in the entire history of humanity.
Oh my God!
An example of the mismatch is the public's reaction to the 9/11 tragedy. It wasn't just terrorism people were scared of immediately following the attacks. It was flying.
Researchers looked at the consequence of millions of people switching from flying to driving, and by one estimate, approximately 1,500 people were killed as a result of their irrational fear driving them from flying to driving, which is 1/2 the total of the number of people who were killed on 9/11 itself.
It certainly appears to be an irrational fear. Dan Gartner has a theory.
Bear in mind that the human brain evolved over millions of years in an environment completely unlike the environment in which we live. In that ancient world, there was no television, there was no internet, there were no cell phones. The only information available to you was personal experience or the experience of your few fellow band members. Today, of course, we can get information, stories from anywhere on planet Earth at real time. It's absolutely fantastic, the change that has happened. But we're processing that information, that deluge of information, with a brain that evolved in that Stone Age environment where information was rare. And it's that mismatch that is the source of the problem.
Jim and Margie have learned never to accept a ride with anyone unless they have their parents' permission. After all, someone you don't know may be a very poor driver.
Abduction by strangers does happen, but it's fantastically rare. Now, it's important to bear that perspective in mind because your children, like all people, are subject to risks at all times.
I think you have to be a realist about how much you should communicate with your child, and you cannot watch them 24 hours a day, 24/7, absolutely not. But you also can't live in the duh bubble, it can't happen to me.
I don't even let my kids go out in the front yard without supervision.
We say that we don't want children to be endangered by strangers, and even if the risk is so incredibly tiny, it's still too much. That's unacceptable. So we say, no, you better stay inside and do what? Play video games, watch television, sit on the couch, and get fat. And guess what? Childhood obesity and diabetes is a real risk. We'll put them in the car and we'll drive them to school. Well, guess what? When you put them in the car and you drive them to school, you actually put them at risk of dying in a car crash.
This thing is actually weighing you in the seat. It knows exactly how far away you are from the airbag on the steering wheel, and it knows if you have your seatbelt on or not. And it's monitoring it to a tune of about 500 times a second, all designed again for you and your family.
No wonder we're not scared of car crashes.
You have the curtain airbag that drops down here.
For certain, the modern vehicle is much safer today than anything I ever rode in as a kid.
Sociologists describe our societies, modern Western societies, as risk societies, meaning that we are increasingly concerned about health and safety. But simultaneously, we are, by an order of magnitude, the safest and healthiest people who ever lived. That is an amazing paradox. It's one of the great paradoxes of our time. All the rare but dramatic things that we worry about today are not new. They existed in one form or another in the past. If you're worried about terrorists, well, terrorism isn't new. In the late 19th century, they were anarchists. In 1923, there was a terrible bombing on Wall Street, so terrorism in New York City isn't new. Child abduction isn't new. Charles Lindbergh's baby was very infamously abducted and murdered. These things have always happened. These nightmares have always been with us. What has changed is our reaction to them, our perception of those threats.
So, what makes us so afraid? Sometimes I feel as though I'm scared of my own shadow. I wondered, if money were no object, how safe could I make my kid? I thought I'd do a little shopping to find out. I found everything from baby knee pads to baby helmets. There are entire sites devoted to this stuff. I couldn't resist. I had to have my baby knee pads. And the bath temperature duck to protect my kid from water that's too hot.
Okay.
Oh, and the antimicrobial scissors. I've heard paper-borne germs can be deadly.
That certainly would help. But you know what? What's the point?
There's a very long list of individuals and organizations who have a self-interest in our perception of risk. I call them fear marketers. They have an interest in manipulating how we perceive threats. Security companies know that if you feel secure at home, you're not a potential customer. You're not going to run out and buy that home alarm, are you? So what do you have to do to grow your market if you're a security company? That's right. You have to spread the perception of risk.
Someone just tried to break in.
I'm sending help right now.
It's not about the reality of risk. The reality is irrelevant. It's the perception that matters.
Our nation has been put on notice. We're not immune from attack.
It's almost a truism that fear works in politics. For an illustration of this, I need only mention the Bush administration.
We will take defensive measures against terrorism to protect Americans.
But according to media consultant Sherry Graydon, one of the biggest reasons we're so afraid isn't politics or fear marketers. For me, it's something that hits pretty close to home.
A huge determining factor in terms of how fearful we are as a culture today is really the media. And it's the media, both news media, entertainment media, and the amount of focus on conflict and violence, from terrorism to disasters to crime. If you look at the primetime television schedule virtually any night of the week, you cannot avoid the notion that we live in a terrifying world where there are threats around every corner. Our kids are going to be abducted, our women are going to be sexually assaulted, aliens are invading, foreigners are blowing us up. It's really a catastrophic environment that television in particular suggests we live in.
When we're thinking of having our kid walk to school or walk to the bus stop, we don't base it on our own experience anymore. We base it on what we've seen on TV, and we've seen that J.C. Dugard got snatched from a bus stop, and we saw another kid got snatched on the way home. So we don't trust our own experience. So what we gauge it on is what we saw on CNN or what we saw on Law and Order. I mean, there's just so many terrifying shows on TV, and each one has to be a little more scary. So one will have a rape, one will have a rape and murder, rape, murder, dismemberment, rape, murder, dismemberment, and the autopsy and the maggots. There's not one episode of Law and Order that could have been shown on TV before 1981. The episode that I watched that I talk about in the book showed a girl, her arms are bound above her head, and there's a blindfold on, and her mouth is taped, and she's going, and there's hands are reaching for her thighs. And before 1981, that was porn, okay? Now it's nighttime entertainment, and if you don't watch that, you watch CSI. So there's no way to escape this fantasy world of constant danger, and we internalize it to the point where people say, how could you let your kid walk to school?
I think television producers and disseminators are enormously irresponsible. There is a volume of research now that documents the impact of violent and fear-inducing media that really we shouldn't be ignoring any longer. Stop! Individual broadcasters and producers and collectively the entertainment industry, I think, has a lot to answer for.
But what about John Walsh? Now here's a man caught in both worlds, both as a member of the media and father of a murdered boy.
Stand by in 5, 4, 3.
A sleepy southern town.
I think much of the television today is very exploitive. There are no boundaries. It is very disturbing. And I think the sensationalist type of reality shows, they are creating a climate of fear. It is about ratings. It is about subscriptions. It's about selling newspapers. That's the reality that we live in. But I still subscribe to the belief that you can do it with some dignity and integrity.
Please stay safe, stay strong, and remember, can make a difference.
One more time, please.
It's been a while since I reported the news, but I wonder if maybe I've been part of the problem.
The case is not closed. In fact, a police investigation is continuing, and charges against the 17-year-old remain. In the meantime, the friends and family of Bridget Grenier await justice. Mark Miller, CKNW.
We're supposed to be informing the public, but according to Dan Gartner, we've been misinforming them by trying to grab ratings.
Overwhelmingly, property and nonviolent crime is the great bulk of crime. Violent crime is only a small fraction. And murder is only a very, very, very small fraction of that. And the sort of dramatic murders that capture so much media attention, they're only a very, very small fraction of overall murders. Now, go and look at how the media portray crime. It's exactly the opposite.
It's starting to look like a killer or killers are still at large.
All the attention goes to the rare, the unusual, the dramatic murders. There's much less for the sort of ordinary murder, the typical murder. There's much less for lesser violent crimes, and there's virtually no attention whatsoever for nonviolent crime.
We're out here living our everyday lives with a mass murder on the loose.
If the media are constantly portraying the rare routinely and the routine rarely, then people start to build up this collective image of reality in which the rare is seen to be routine, and the routine is seen to be rare.
My daughter was just kidnapped, top of the hill with a great forge.
Not only is the media misleading, it's actually portraying crime in a way that's actually the opposite of reality.
Here it is.
A shocking story.
Kidnapper and a missing mom. What path will they take?
Dateline investigation.
Kidnapped 1 week old.
Now you're in danger. Your family's in danger.
Children at risk every time they're online.
A startling investigation.
One of the things that I remember growing up was Mrs. Schweinhardt across the street. Mrs. Schweinhardt knew everybody's business.
Back then, yeah, you could go into anybody's house. You knew everybody on the block.
I think in many ways, this modern high-speed society has lost that sense of neighborhood. There are an awful lot of communities that don't have a Mrs. Schweinhardt.
When they were attacked by a man wielding a baseball bat.
Misty Cockrell was 16 years old in 1995 when she and her friend Tanya Smith were abducted and attacked by a stranger on the streets of Abbotsford, BC.
He grabbed his baseball bat from behind him, threatened us, and pushed us through the bushes. At that time, I got a good look at him and figured, you know what, if we do this, he's gonna kill us anyway. So might as well fight, right? And he put the bat down. That's when I jumped for it. So I ended up hitting him in the back. He grabbed it from me, he caught it. I got hit in the head with the baseball bat 7 times, and I remember it was right here because I was staring at my high school, which is just across the street, and figured that was the last thing I was gonna see.
Incredibly, Misty survived and made a full recovery. Tanya was not so lucky. Her body was found in a river the next day. It took police 6 months to catch Tanya's killer. Misty went on to volunteer with Victim Services, helping the police to offer support for other crime victims. She's become a poster child for crime survivors. Misty believes it was her street smarts, the fact that she was definitely not a bubble-wrapped kid that saved her life that day.
I grew up a single mom. I remember being able to go out till, late at night in just my pajamas and playing around in the yard or around the neighborhood, and a lot of freedom. When you're not so sheltered, you gain the coping skills and you gain the life experiences. I had to learn things the hard way, and I learned my lessons at an early age. Had I been sheltered, I wouldn't have had the coping skills to deal with this. I would have shattered, I would have crumbled.
Today, Misty is a mom of 2 beautiful and daring little girls. Her first is just a couple years older than my own Emmanuel. The victim-turned mom. Who better to ask for advice?
When I first thought about we should phone you, I thought, well, here's a woman who's been through this thing. I thought you would totally have your kids bubble wrapped.
Oh, yeah, surprise. No, I'm not like that. You got no shoes? I've got 2 little girls that need to learn how to be strong and independent. They need to learn how to fight back, and they got to learn how to not get beaten down from other people. That's my role model to them, but I'm not going to preach it to them. I'd rather teach it to them through life experience.
I finally feel like I'm getting closer to the answer. It's time for one last trip to Prince Edward Island of all places. I've come to talk to the police. For 2 days, chiefs from all over Canada are gathering for their annual convention. I figure, who has a better handle on how safe the world is than these guys?
It's a recipe for us to see not only a decrease in crime, but an increase in crime, increase in violence,
As I traveled here, I thought maybe they'd tell me things are worse than they are for political reasons. Budgets are tight after all, and they wouldn't want to talk their way out of much-needed funding.
Let me tell you, the cities of Canada are the safest cities anywhere in North America. They're some of the safest cities in the world.
In terms of overall safety, certainly when I reflect back raising my children and the community that I live in and have worked in for over 30 years as a police officer, I believe our community is safe.
I'm frankly more concerned with the dangers that lurk in the basement on the internet than I am about the dangers lurking in a park in the middle of a weekend afternoon where a bunch of kids are maybe playing ball.
I learned pretty quickly the questions I'm asking are nothing new to our police chiefs. They grapple with the problem of fear and the difference between perception and reality every day.
And I'm finding as a police chief, that's 50% of my business now is dealing with the perception of crime, because that's just as real crime.
There have been a number of tragic circumstances, and it's those things that make people fearful. They read about the abduction of a child by a stranger. It's a very rare occurrence, but it can happen. And so you've got to do everything you can to make sure your children know how to be safe, know how to deal with strangers, know how to go and who to go to when they are the slightest bit fearful.
You arm your child with the right thoughts, the right attitudes, and sort of some basic prevention skills, and you won't have any problem.
I came here for some perspective and wisdom. What I got was a call to action. I've traveled a lot of miles. I've talked to a lot of people to find out if it's safe enough for Emmanuelle to ride her bike to school.
Daddy, wait!
I'd hoped that someone could answer that question, and I learned there is no simple solution.
Your head's getting big.
We can solve this problem. We know how to do this, but we have to think a little bit outside the box, back to when we were kids, what we were getting, and then hopefully get our kids to have those experiences.
The most important thing for a kid to keep them safe is confidence. And there's a reason it's called self-confidence as opposed to parent-assisted confidence or let me do that for you confidence. You have to do things by yourself to get the self-confidence.
Every time you jumped out of a tree and skinned your knee, you learned something about how the world works. Every time you encountered a risk and made a decision, you learned. That's what childhood is. That's how we grow up.
As a parent, it's your responsibility to gauge when your child is ready for that, when your child is ready to be out on the street alone, to go to a park alone, and there's no magic age. It is something that has to be determined by parents by speaking to their kids, knowing their kids, understanding their kids, and knowing what their kids, the judgment their kids are capable of exercising.
Perhaps the most surprising thing that I learned is that everyone I talk to from all sides of the issues agree in the end about one thing. It's not about danger or safety when it comes to raising our kids. It's about saying no to the biggest threat of all, our own fear.
When FDR became president in 1933, the United States, indeed the entire world, was facing a crisis of almost unimaginable proportions. There were a lot of really good reasons to be afraid. And yet, FDR said something quite amazing. He said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Open the lines of communication with your kids. Don't terrify them. Talk to them. And quit watching so much TV.
Okay, good. You ready for this? Can you do it? Right off.
We just can't continue to go on and react. I'm scared of this, I'm scared of that.
Good. Okay, now can you just pull that wheel right off? Ready? Okay.
I am so scared.
You don't need to be scared.
Okay, just
Ready?
one more and then I can...
I think the pendulum would take a while to come back to the middle ground where we could feel safe and trust again. But that definitely is the hope. That's the way it should be.
I'll hold your...
Okay, ready?
Oh no.
Okay. Pedal, pedal, pedal.
The solution turns out to be really simple, although I'm not quite sure how to get there, and it is the word community.
You don't have to live in a neighborhood with no air conditioning where everybody sits on the front porch. For people to know their neighbors and look out for each other. And I think that would be my vision for the future, that we can recapture some of that.
I'm there with you.
Are you holding on?
I was. Don't put your brakes on. Keep going. You're doing it on your own, honey. Pedal, pedal. Pedal, pedal, pedal. You're doing it, honey. Look. No hands.